Welcome back to Face the Nation. We continue our conversation now with our panel of new House members. Earlier this week, we asked them about their priorities in Washington. Another topic, of course, all of you haven't been on the job very long, but very quickly, we did see one of your colleagues introduce articles of impeachment. The House Oversight Chairman, Elijah Cummings, said that's premature. What do you all think? Is that too soon?
I think so. I'm a former federal prosecutor, and we certainly never made charging decisions before the FBI finished their investigation. I think we've got to let Mueller finish his investigation, see what evidence he finds, and then we can make some decisions. You're waiting on the Mueller report. I am.
It's absolutely premature. This is way too early to be talking about this. We need to let the investigation run its course, and I just think that it's also something that can be used as a partisan lightning rod that we need to try to avoid.
What about the tone of this conversation? One of your colleagues, Congresswoman from Michigan, was speaking to supporters and used a profanity and said, impeachment should be what we're talking about. What do you think of maybe not the language, but the premise of what's being talked about?
I'm from Staten Island. I have no problem with profanity, okay? But what I have a problem with, though, is the fact that she is talking about this issue and urging action on this issue before the investigation has been completed. That will just continue this era of hyper-partisanship that we have to move away from. So I certainly object to it.
Yeah.
Congresswoman?
Premature.
Premature.
The gravity of that word is too big and too important to just throw it around.
I want to also ask you about some of the things you campaigned on. Congressman, as we said, you're from Connecticut. In your home state, that was the site of the Sandy Hook shooting. I know you've talked a bit, given your time in the classroom, and you've thought a lot about this. What is it that you think can actually get done? What are you going to try to do about gun control?
Well, I think that any conversation about arming teachers is not the response to gun control. I think we have to have background checks. We have to make sure that we are getting guns off the street.
So would you commend the Trump administration for this ban on bump stocks that recently happened?
Yes.
But not enough.
It's a first step.
It's a first step.
Yes.
Congressman Rose, you served in Afghanistan, as we said in your introduction. Both President Obama and President Trump have wanted to draw down troops from that war zone. What do you think of that idea of a drawdown or a full withdrawal?
Well, there's been a larger problem in terms of the way in which we have tried to overcome 21st century threats, and that is that we are fighting sequential one-year engagements without any type of long-term strategy. So the key here in Afghanistan, because we saw in Iraq, the invasion of Iraq was absolutely foolish, but then we did a speedy withdrawal, which I believe was motivated by politics, and then we had to go right back in. We cannot afford to do the same thing in Afghanistan, but we also have to come to the realization that the only way in which we will stabilize that country is with some type of political reconciliation with the Taliban, and it's our responsibility as the part of an international coalition to provide the freedom and the space for that political reconciliation to be realized, and I intend on playing a part in trying to contribute to that.
And that is not a small ask either, to get diplomatic talks with the Taliban underway. The administration is trying to do that.
It absolutely isn't, but we have been at war in Afghanistan now for 17 years. To put things into perspective, people are now enlisting in the United States military who were born after 9/11. Okay, we cannot just have perpetual war, but we also have to maintain our leadership on the global stage, which means that when we make a commitment, we stand by it, and we don't just try to exercise politics on the global stage. We need to have a long-term strategy, not governed by tweets.
That sounds like what the Trump administration is suggesting.
Well, what I just saw was an announcement about a withdrawal like that, which took everyone by surprise. I believe that that's playing politics, and that's a shame. I don't want to see Americans put at risk. I've watched loved ones get hurt. I don't want to see that if it's unnecessary, but I just want us to have a long-term strategy that realizes the fact that politics is what matters here, and it's the United States military's job to provide that room for diplomacy to take its action.
Congressman, you've also served, as we said in the introduction. What do you think? Do you support not just Afghanistan, a drawdown, but a withdrawal in total?
You know, what I would add to what Max is saying, and what I think is lost a little bit in the discussion of Trump's strategy, is this idea that we don't have a good plan with our allies. We are always at our strongest as a country when we are moving forward with our traditional allies in NATO, for example. That is when we're able to get the space to have diplomatic relations, which when we bring world approbation to bear. And so when we're in an era where we're treating our traditional adversaries better than our allies, I think that is making it more and more difficult for us to operate from a point of power on the world scene.
But you support a drawdown?
I think we certainly need to be talking about how we end these wars, but I don't think you can do it and say, you know, as we just announced in Syria, we're just pulling out. You have to have that long-term strategy, and that is a piece that's missing.
Congressman, this week, not only a new week in Congress, but also the beginning, it seems, of the 2020 presidential campaign season. I know. Get ready.
Yeah.
If you just finish your own campaigns, I know you're sort of, wow.
Yeah.
It's exhausting, but it's beginning.
Yeah.
Who do you think, as people who just ran competitive and successful races, how do you win as a Democrat in 2020 in a presidential race?
You know, I think that 2020 is going to be about 2020, and it's not going to be about 2018. There are certainly lessons you can learn, I think, from some of our races. I think there's a hunger out there for people who are willing to speak honestly, who aren't, just so poll tested and holding back on what they're really thinking. I think there's also a hunger out there for people who are trying to solve problems instead of just carrying a partisan banner. I think the country needs to heal. The divisions are growing, and I think that we need a uniter to be our nominee.
Do you have anyone in mind from your home state?
Well, I certainly like my former boss, Julian Castro, who is a friend of mine and a mentor of mine, and we have a lot of political talent in Texas. So,
what about the rest of you?
I'm supporting Mikey. But if I could just have one important thing, because it's obvious that election season's starting again, but what we can't do is campaign in the halls of Congress. When it comes to things like infrastructure and reducing health care costs, we can't say, oh, I don't want to give this president a win because it might improve his chances in 2020.
Is that what you think is happening now in the House?
I think that there's the potential that it could happen. We've only been governing now for 24 hours, but there's the potential that we could say, man, there's all this opportunity for consensus. Think about draining the swamp, right? Everybody's running on anti-corruption now, but in order for us to do something, we have to be bipartisan, which means everyone's going to win. If all we're thinking about is 2020, that's going to be a big, big problem, and the American people are going to suffer.
I think if we're going to win as Democrats, we need to run the kind of races that form broad coalitions. The way we took back the majority of the House is through districts like mine, the 11th District of New Jersey, where I ran with a broad coalition of people on issues that everyone in my district, from progressives to conservatives, agree on. Things like infrastructure reform, things like bringing down healthcare costs, things like really, focusing on our environment and how we move forward now, not in 50 years, making sure we have universal background checks for gun purchases. These are things that the majority of Americans agree on, and the Democrats are always at their strongest when they're focused on families and they're focused on the issues that are going to move people forward.
And all of that requires working with a Republican Senate and a Republican president.
Yes.
And all of you are willing to do that?
Here's the shocking thing, though. 2016 and 2018 were not that different. It's just different political parties won. If you think about what Donald Trump ran on, okay, if you put some of the racist stuff aside for a moment, which is difficult, I know, but he spoke about infrastructure, he spoke about drug costs, he wanted to protect Medicare and Social Security, draining the swamp. We ran on many of those same things. The American people right now are united, that they want sensible solutions to deal with the things that really cause them pain and suffering. And now it's our responsibility to actually do something about it.
Thank you very much for this conversation. I wish you all luck as lawmakers. Welcome to Washington.